Hi, I'm Stewart Spinks and welcome to episode 395 of my podcast, Beekeeping Short and Sweet. The weather has been typically spring-like, warmer days but with chilly nights. The double brood method has worked really well in managing spring growth, and the spring honey crop is growing nicely. And Sweet, a beekeeping podcast for the inquisitive beekeeper with a short attention span. A beekeeper, in fact, just like me. Hi everyone, podcast time once more, and I'm going to kick off with the weather report, and hopefully it highlights how my early spring double brood method is so effective at preventing granulation of the oilseed rape honey that we produce. It's been typically spring-like. There have been times out in the apiaries where I've felt really quite warm, especially the sheltered apiaries, and mornings when I've dashed back indoors and grabbed another sweater or jacket because there's been a ground frost. Very much a spring-like feel to conditions right now, although April did feel as though it had been very dry. No April showers to speak of. It is, of course, May now, this podcast coming out to you on Sunday the 2nd of May. That is for those of you on Patreon. If you're picking up the podcast from one of the other usual podcast apps, then it will be a month or more later. So why not consider grabbing a subscription and joining me as the very latest podcast is released? We're fully into weekly inspections now. There have been a few chilly late morning inspections, the bees not being terribly happy about that, but I do need to get round all of the apiaries, and so needs must. At least I'm getting used to being stung once more. Doesn't feel like such a surprise. It is important to get into the hives regularly now. We've had a fairly torrid time with nucleus colonies growing so rapidly and becoming congested and swarming, but the full-size hives have been far easier to control. The extra space in the brood box, the extra space in the addition of a second brood box in quite a number of larger colonies, and even adding supers to some of those very largest double-brooded hives that seem to have grown almost uncontrollably. Our farm apiary is where we have the bulk of our spring honey production colonies, and those have performed very well so far. We have lost a few to swarming, maybe 3 or 4, out of around 30 or so colonies, so I can put up with that. All of them have a second brood box on. The vast majority now have a queen excluder and super, with a few racking up 2 or even 3 supers on top of the second brood box. A pretty happy state of affairs for me. I'm not one to boast about the quantity of honey each colony is producing. Those of you that listen regularly will know by now that with each of the monster hives we have that produce 4, 5, 6 or even 7 supers of honey, we also have an overwhelming number of colonies that produce maybe 2 or 3. That is, if any of them haven't swarmed. I do like to think that where I am pretty good as a beekeeper is bee health. Hopefully, I'm not tempting fate when I say we don't see a lot of nasty disease issues in our colonies, and I think that's mainly because of the zero tolerance with chronic bee paralysis virus and regularly treating the colonies for varroa. Good bee health management is paramount to a good honey crop. If all colonies are healthy, even the worst foraging colony will produce an excess that can be extracted. And for me, each year, an average honey crop is all that I'm really looking for. Honey sales are not my main focus as a commercial beekeeper, as you will all know. That said, I do love producing a nice crop of local honey for our stockists, and their customers seem to like it a lot. So please don't think honey production isn't important to me, but it's far more about the quality than the quantity, perhaps. So at the farm, the oilseed rape crop is coming in well. We could do with some rain. It did rain last night, actually, but A little bit of rain will boost that final week or two of nectar before it all goes over, and I have seen some fields of oilseed rape that are now finishing, over at the fishing lakes for instance. But the hawthorn is now in flower, and that produces a lovely tasting honey, and I'm hopeful we may get to isolate some of that from the majority of the oilseed rape honey that we'll have shortly. One of the next jobs on my list, and it's an ever-growing list it seems, is to get my honey room organised so that I am ready for the extraction process. Unfortunately, the frames of foundation in the second brood boxes that I added had a distinctive curve to them. I believe this is an issue with the tensioning in the wires that's caused the comb to be drawn out in a very noticeable bow. Now, if we were to use these frames in one hive, it wouldn't be a problem at all. But I use them for making splits, adding replacement drawn comb to other colonies, and more generally as supplemental frames in other colonies. This necessarily means that those frames need to be drawn out nice and straight. Otherwise, there are going to be high spots and low spots, and this could, in the worst case situation, cause bees to be crushed, sealed cells to be damaged, and in low spots we'll end up with comb being drawn out further than it should be, and again asking to be damaged when lifted out of the hive. It just complicates a situation that shouldn't be at all complicated. It's not a huge problem though. I have already made the decision to use these brood boxes for honey production this spring, and to facilitate this I've added a queen excluder between the bottom brood box and the top brood box, trapping the queen once again in the bottom brood box. Once the brood has emerged from that top box, because the queen has started laying in some of those frames in many of these colonies, the bees will backfill those cells with honey, and once capped I can remove it and get it back to base for extraction. I intend using the Appy Melter warming cabinet to melt the wax and honey out of the frames and start again with fresh foundation. It is definitely a pain in the backside and causing more work than I would have anticipated, but these things happen and we'll sort it and move on. It wouldn't be such an issue if it weren't for so many frames being affected, probably 15 boxes, so that's 150 frames. We do have a fix though, of sorts, but if I backpedal a moment and just explain, these are Langstroth frames, and they are somewhat unique in that the sidebars don't have a routed groove in them that most other brood frames have. This means that the wax can hang in whatever shape it wants to, whereas for something like the 14 by 12 brood frames that we use, these have the groove in the sidebar, and the wax is held there, keeping it relatively straight, held loosely in that groove in the sidebars. We always used wired frames previously, so the wax has then been embedded and fixed in place. So this is not something that I've ever encountered before. Another beekeeping first for me. The fix is that the sidebars have to have a hole drilled in them, and then something called a foundation support pin is pushed through to hold the foundation in place. These are small split pins, so that the foundation sits between that split in the pin. They're not particularly thin, maybe 3 or 4 millimetres wide, so there's a nice gap in there for the foundation to sit into, but the knack is to make sure that the hole is drilled squarely and level. It then grips the foundation nicely. I've only just started using these pins, so we'll see how they work out, and I'll let you know at some point in a future podcast. In other news, I've recently invested in a queen cell incubator. I hope you have a drink and a comfy seat. There's a story to tell here. So, you'll know in recent years I've been buying my mated queens from Northumberland Honey, and to be fair, they have been superb. The problem is they are also very expensive, and the price keeps going in one direction only. Add to that the regularly failed attempts on my part at introduction and an occasional drone-laying queen, It all adds up to an expensive part of my business that honestly has become too much to bear. I got talking to a fellow bee farmer and discussed this dilemma with him, and he said he'd found a similar situation with his business, and so he bought a mother queen, that's a queen used to produce the queen cells, and has a local beekeeper producing the queen cells for him because he was far too busy to do it himself. And of course, the cost of the queen cells is far more affordable than buying mated queens. There is, of course, a gamble here in that you need to add the queen cell to a mating nuke and wait to see if she successfully mates or not. And then you've got to look at the traits that she might have. The upside is they're a fraction of the cost of a mated queen, so you could lose several virgin queens or poorly mated queens or queens with poor traits before getting anywhere near the cost of a mated queen. So having listened to this tale, I figured I should give it a try. But the challenge is getting the queen cell from supplier, albeit a local supplier, to mating nuke without chilling it or allowing it to dry out, hence the newly purchased mobile incubator. I collected my first batch of queen cells just this week, and to be honest, I was a little disappointed. They were pretty small queen cells, and some looked like they had been encased in additional comb. Add to the fact that my initial order for 25 queen cells became a scraping of the bottom of the barrel 18 queen cells, and I was left feeling somewhat nervous as to my first attempt at circumnavigating the costly process of buying mated queens. Maybe there's a point to that. And to be honest, all of this, especially since recently, I've been getting some cracking queen cell production from my colonies, albeit that they're attempting to swarm. The difference in size and provisioning of these swarm cells appears to have been huge when compared to the newly purchased queen cells. They may well turn out just fine, but I guess why take the risk? This got me thinking. Why am I not producing my own queens? It's not like I don't have the knowledge after all. Well, it's time. Time is the biggest issue, as I'm sure you will have guessed. But if I'm going to do this, I need to stop talking about it and get on and just do it. So what do I need to do? Well, I need to select a donor colony. A colony that currently has a good selection of traits that I want from my bees. Mild-tempered, calm on the comb, low swarming tendency, for example. It would be great to have them all. Then I need to select drone colonies with the same kind of traits because I'm going to need to flood the apiary with selected drones to hedge my bets in getting the right mating combination. Then I need to get the whole queen cell production system up and running. I think I will run the John Harding system once more, but alongside my more reliable, previously successful method using the cloak board. Not forgetting that once I have viable queen cells, I'm going to need mating nukes for them all. And that will need a lot of boxes. Luckily, I have the 14 by 12 nuke production set up to hand, so we won't be short of a box or two. I should be okay for around 70 to 100 plus queen cells, but I do need to get organised. I think this is going to have to be my June project. It will give me a little while to get organised, get all the planning sorted, move equipment, get the bees around into the right apiary, and figure out my timeline, which I'll manage on my trusty spreadsheet system that I've used many times before. There will be, of course, updates of successes and no doubt the failures here on the podcast, but also on videos on the Patreon app and website. So this week, I'm going to end the podcast a little earlier than normal, if you don't mind. I've struggled to shake off this blasted chest infection, and I'm sorry to keep moaning about it, but goodness knows how long this has been going on. It seems to be for many weeks, and I probably just need to rest up. Not, of course, that there's any chance of that happening at this busy time of the year. Oh well, I better open another bucket of honey for my own personal use. At this rate, there's not going to be much left for our customers. Well, that's it for this week. For all of you who haven't yet signed up to my Patreon page, I, together with Steph, have been creating beekeeping content for many years now. And if you're looking for some straightforward, down-to-earth tips and techniques, help and advice, then do take a look at my Patreon page. We have over 1,700 individual beekeeping posts, videos and podcasts filled with useful and timely help and advice. My approach is pragmatic and calm, sometimes entertaining, but always with help and support for the beekeepers at the heart of what I do. I keep my videos short and concise wherever possible, no waffle, no flannel, just honest beekeeping advice from years of keeping bees. Take a look and join me for the new 2026 beekeeping season. It'll cost you less than a jar of honey, and you never know, there may be something there that will help improve your beekeeping. Check us out online at www.patreon.com/Norfolk Honey.